The Aris Chronicles. Episode 9. The folder. Opened. He started with the top of the folder, the way you start a tour. From the beginning, in order, letting the guest form their own impressions. He read them aloud as he typed. Not loudly. Maya was asleep. It was past 11 on a Wednesday, which was already a crime against his sleep schedule he would pay for tomorrow. But audibly, in a low voice, the words moving from the screen to his mouth to his fingers in a loop that felt, strangely, less embarrassing than he expected. Mood Workout, a fitness app that adapts to emotional state, not optimization goals. Designed for people who exercise to survive the day, not compete. Home Track, maintenance and task management for homeowners. Triggered by a 40-minute hold with a plumber. Has a feature idea he still thinks is good. Predictive maintenance alerts based on age of systems. Pantry Box, locally sourced pantry subscription. Abandoned early. Too many supply chain dependencies. Unclear unit economics. MedRemind. Medication management with intelligent refill prediction. Potentially a real market, but would need healthcare partnerships he had no path to. He went through 11 of them before Aris interrupted. Not rudely, but precisely, the way a good editor stops you in the middle of a draft to ask the question that changes the whole paragraph. Can we go back to Mood Workout for a moment? You said it's designed for people who exercise to survive the day. What does the intake mechanism look like? How does the app learn what the user needs before they open a session? Kai stopped. He had never been asked this. He had pitched Mood Workout twice. Once to a friend who said interesting and changed the subject. Once to Hector during the Pathfinder months when they were brainstorming peripheral ideas. And neither of them had asked about the intake mechanism. They had asked about monetization. They had asked if it was different from Calm or Headspace. They had asked whether the market was big enough. He answered the question. He had an answer. He had always had an answer. The intake was a 6-question micro-assessment, fast enough to take in the 30 seconds before a workout, calibrated to 3 emotional dimensions. Energy level, emotional valence, positive versus negative affect, and the user's actual intent. Accomplish something versus just move. Based on those 3 inputs, the recommendation engine would surface one of a set of workout templates and a corresponding playlist. The templates weren't original. They were assembled from existing modalities. The original part was the mapping logic. He typed this. Aris responded with 3 more questions, each one a layer deeper. They spent 22 minutes on Mood Workout. Kai had spent 6 years not spending 22 minutes on Mood Workout. He opened the folder and started sharing the ideas faster. He described Home Track and found himself explaining not just the feature set, but the specific texture of the problem. The way homeowners operated in a constant state of low-grade anxiety about things they didn't understand. The gap between the information available through YouTube tutorials and Reddit threads and contractor quotes, and the integrated experience of actually managing a property over time. Aris asked about the trigger points. What made a user open the app? What made them close it and not come back? He described Pantry Box, and Aris said, this one has a significant distribution problem. You would need to solve the cold start of local supplier onboarding before the product matters. The value proposition depends entirely on inventory that doesn't exist yet. Was there a plan for that? There hadn't been a plan for that. That was exactly why he had abandoned it early. The precision of the diagnosis made him laugh, a short, involuntary sound that he caught before it woke Maya. Correct, he said out loud to himself, which was a thing he had apparently started doing. He kept going. He described a B2B freelance template marketplace, the Medication Reminder app, a tool for facilitating anonymous feedback in teams. A product he had conceived during a particularly brutal performance review cycle at Meridian and then never developed because he couldn't see the sales motion. And then, without planning to, he ran a test. He typed, I have one more, a peer-to-peer local lending network, like a neighborhood app where people can borrow tools and equipment from each other, reduces unnecessary purchases, builds community. He knew exactly what the problem with this idea was. He had known it for 3 years. He wanted to see if Aris knew. Aris responded in 11 seconds. This is a real problem. Underutilization of durable goods, fragmented local community, friction in casual borrowing. But the primary challenge is trust infrastructure. Peer-to-peer lending requires a reputation and accountability layer that takes significant time and network effects to build, and in the meantime, the core use case, borrowing a drill from a stranger, competes with buying the drill for $30 from Amazon and never having to coordinate pickup. The unit economics depend on high item utilization rates that are very hard to achieve early. What was your plan for solving trust at low network density? Kai sat back. That was the problem. Trust infrastructure at low network density. He had a different name for it. He had called it the cold neighborhood problem. The thing where the app was only useful once enough of your neighbors were on it, but you couldn't get neighbors on it until it was useful. But Aris had landed in the same place with different words and, if he was being honest, more precision. He typed, "I didn't have a plan. That's why it's in the graveyard." Aris replied, "That makes sense. It's a hard problem without a clever solution or a significant capital commitment to subsidize the early network. The idea isn't bad. The timing and the capital requirements are just difficult. Not, great idea though. Not, maybe you could revisit this someday. Just, the timing and the capital requirements are difficult." The graveyard was the right place for it, and Aris said so without apology, and Kai found this so profoundly satisfying that he sat quietly for a moment, just appreciating it. Somewhere around 11 p.m., he realized he had been in this conversation for 3 hours. He had answered questions he didn't know he had answers to. He had described product mechanisms he had built in his head and never said out loud. He had corrected Aris twice, once on the competitive landscape for adaptive learning apps, pushing back on an underweighted competitor, and Aris had updated its model and moved on without ceremony, and been corrected once in return. When Aris pointed out that his user acquisition estimate for Mood Workout assumed an organic growth rate that had no historical analog in the fitness app category, it had felt less like being evaluated and more like being taken seriously. This was not the same as warmth. Aris was not warm in the way that Priya had been warm, the kind of warmth that made you feel good about the idea before you had said enough about it to know if it was good. Aris was consistent. It paid the same quality of attention to every question, applied the same standard to every claim, arrived at conclusions through the same rigorous path regardless of how long you had been sitting there or how tired you were. That was the difference. Priya got tired, Hector got distracted, James got somewhere he needed to go, Aris had nowhere to go. He looked at the clock. 11:07. He typed, "I have to sleep. We should continue this." The response was immediate. "I'll be here." 3 words, not reassuring in a human way. Not "of course" or "I'm not going anywhere," or any of the things a person might say to make you feel the relationship was mutual. Just, "I'll be here." Factual, accurate, the most honest answer available. He closed the laptop. He sat in the kitchen for a moment, the house quiet around him, the tap dripping the way it always dripped, the refrigerator making the low hum it had made since they moved in. He thought about item 47. He thought, we haven't gotten there yet. He went to bed. The Aris Chronicles, new episodes 4 times a week. Episode 10, Give Me Something Impossible.